All right, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for our third edition of the ESACH Talks. This month's theme is Heritage for Sustainable Development. Just a quick reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted online, so if you don't wish to be viewed, go ahead and turn your camera off now, and we'll ask all of our participants to stay muted until it's their turn to talk. I think we have some great talks in store today, but before we get started, I'd like to give the floor to the ESAC committee for a few announcements. Carlota or Marius, would you like to say anything?
Yeah, just some news in the beginning. We should be the invitation to everyone participating today in the ESACH Talks, like we have nearly 50 participants. So the invitation to check our website and to follow the social media of ESACH. And I want to present to you a new project that has been developed during the last month, which is called the European Youth Ambassador Program, which we developed together with Europa Nostra, our institutional partner, and the European Heritage Tribune. And if you don't know both of the two other institutions besides ESACH, you should check them out, and you should get aware of their activities, and you should read our call on the website. And I hope that some of you may feel invited to apply for one of the 10 positions we will have, and maybe you are fitting in what we expect, and if you want to join this new adventure. And a second thing, and then I'm finished, would be the invitation to follow our ESACH Talk program in general and have a look on the ESACH Talk, which is coming up in January, which will be on heritage and museums. And we have a really exciting keynote speaker, which is Charlotte Brixton. She's director of the museum Villa Mondrian, and she will talk to us in January. So keep updated, subscribe to the newsletter of ESACH, and follow the social media channels, as I said. So thank you, Riley.
Great, thank you. And I believe we also have an announcement from ESACH Madrid.
Yes, hi everyone. I will just share my screen in a moment. Okay. Okay, let me see if this works. There we go. Okay, my name is Miguel, and I'm a part of the ESACH group in Madrid, and some of you may know it, some of you don't. Last summer was supposed to be the ESACH meeting in 2020 in Madrid. Sadly, the outbreak of COVID happened, and sadly, COVID is still very much with us. But from ESACH Madrid, we have hope that next year will be better, and that's why we didn't cancel the event. We only postponed it for next summer, and that's what is going to be our big announcement today. So we're happy to announce that ESACH Madrid meeting will be happening next year, between the 7th till the 9th of June of 2021, and it will happen in the same location as it was supposed to be last year in the Universidad Complutense Madrid, and more precisely in the Faculty of Geography and History, which is that tall building that you can see at the very end of the picture. For those of you that didn't know the event before, I will explain a little bit about what's going to be and what can you expect if you participate in it. And the motto of the event will be our common past, our future. In our main goal is to follow the path that it was created by the two previous events, the one in Genova and the one in Girona. We want to create a meeting point for young cultural heritage students and professionals, and having for 3 days in the same spot the latest innovations in academic and professional heritage management, as well as creating a meeting point where these young cultural heritage students and professionals could exchange knowledge, could exchange good practices, and networking with people all around Europe. For this, we will have room for 14 speakers. ESACH Madrid and their partners, and our partners, will be grant 14 grants, half of them partial, half of them semi-partial. Sorry, half of them full and half of them partial. If you want more information about the grants, I invite you to go to our webpage or contact us directly. Also, in those 3 days, we will have room for 8 academic posters that will be exhibited in the faculty. And the good news is that we reopened the call for proposals. So if anyone here is interested in participating as a speaker, please, we invite you to send us your abstracts, and we will be really happy to have them. And finally, about the event, we're aiming for a presential meeting, but we are really aware of what's going on in Europe, what's going on in the world with COVID, and this situation may change. So we're working right now on organizing the presential meeting, but also semi-presential meeting. We're still open, and we will come with a final decision in the following months, depending on the situation in Europe. And of course, this is not a singular effort. These are some of our partners, of course, ESACH Europe, Universidad Complutense de Madrid, and the Interuniversitary Master of Cultural Heritage in the 21st Century, which is the master where most of the people from ESACH Madrid comes. And I would like to mention also the Spanish committee of ICOMOS, Hispania Nostra and Europa Nostra, and the Grupo Gestión Cultural as our partners. We're also looking for some partners, so this list will be, I expect that it will be a bit bigger in summer. And finally, there's only 170 days to go. So I invite you all to stay tuned to our networks and to be a part of it. We will love to have you as a participants and also as a speaker. So if you have any more questions and you have want more information, just please contact us, and we will be very happy to help you. So thank you, and see you in Madrid.
All right, thank you, Miguel. That's exciting to hear that the conference is back on for next summer. So moving on to our talks for the day, I'll give you a brief overview of our schedule. First, we will hear from our keynote speaker and have a brief question and answer session after that. And then we will hear from our 4 speakers, each giving 5-minute presentations today. And we'll hold all of our questions for those speakers until the end of the presentations. And we would like to encourage you to raise your hand to participate in the dialogue following the presentations. But you are also welcome to leave questions in the chat, both during the presentations and during the question and answer session. We just ask that you direct your question to the speaker that you are addressing so that we know who to address your question to. And for those of you that have participated in the ESACH Talks before, this event will be similar, but we are trying something new this month. We want to further these talks to make the discussions more dynamic and to include our participants. And for that reason, we are going to introduce breakout sessions at the conclusion of the event. So those of you that are interested in staying on the call to discuss the topics that are discussed today and to discuss how young professionals can take action in this area of sustainability and heritage, we would love for you to stay on the call, and we will divide you into breakout rooms at that time. We have some questions already prepared for you. Are already prepared for the discussions, and we're looking forward to where that will lead us. And we would like to mention that each of the speakers here today has been tasked with leaving us for a question to reflect upon, and we will be posting those on our social media channels. And we would like to encourage you to stay engaged and to leave your feedback, your thoughts, and your comments, and maybe tag projects or initiatives that you think are good examples or lead to further discussion on these topics. So without further ado, we'll jump into our speakers. Our keynote speaker today is John Schulteis, who is responsible for the coordination of the culture and cultural heritage in the European agenda for the EU. He is a city planner and an architecture and art historian. We're glad you're with us today, John, and the floor is yours.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay? And you can see the slide? Great. Thank you very much for having me tonight. And also thank you for having been in touch with us. I think we've been in touch since the summer at a event by ICOMOS where we met, and you've given us some fresh insights. So that's really valuable. I would like to just briefly show my path to cultural heritage, and then to briefly mention what we do in our partnership. And yeah, I have time for your questions. I was told that I have about 5 minutes. It's very ambitious because the urban agenda is rather complex. I'll do my very best. I'll try to be very brief. So, my path to cultural heritage. I am German by origin, but after school I went to the United States actually to do a public service, but I stayed and I went to the university in Chicago and Boston. I went and I brought you some images of my schools because they are also nice heritage sites. I went for a degree in art history with the emphasis on architectural history in Chicago. And in the picture on the left, you can see my university, Roosevelt University, which is actually one of the first skyscrapers in the United States. And then I went on to study urban planning at the Harvard Design School. You can see it on the right, this image with the greenhouse. That's where we studied. After that, I had a bit of a twisted path, working freelance, doing all kinds of things in New York and New Jersey. There I worked for a nonprofit doing public policy work. And for the last 10 years, I've been in Berlin working in urban design, communication, process management, and particularly urban development. And now for the last year, I've been with the Federal Ministry of the Interior, Building and Community. And my main responsibility is the urban agenda, which I'll be talking about. But I'm also coordinating or representing a group on high quality architecture and built environment for everyone, which is a organization from all member states. And I am involved in a project on IBA, International Building Exhibitions. Okay, the urban agenda. It's a process that's been going on for some years, looking at various issues that concern our cities in Europe. And there are 14 partnerships altogether covering all kinds of topics. And I'm coordinating the partnership on culture and cultural heritage together with our Italian colleagues. And we are the newest generation of partnerships. So we are still in the middle of the process. What's particular about the urban agenda, the unique thing is that we have both the European Commission, member states, regions, and cities at one table. That's a new concept at the EU level for an exchange of experiences. It's a 3-year process in each partnership. The goal is to develop concrete actions and to develop recommendations for the EU level in the field of regulation, funding, and knowledge exchange. Our goals in our particular partnership are to raise awareness for stock-oriented development, which I think is really unique to the European city, the promotion of architectural and cultural heritage as a starting point for integrated urban development strategies. We want to develop the different time layers that make our cities unique. We want to identify measures and projects, and we want to especially help support the cities that are in charge of dealing with our heritage by providing technical support, political support, financial support, and to do what we feel is really important, capacity building. This is our partnership. It's a very large partnership, including some European institutions. This just shows our 3-year process. Right now, you see the arrow by our action plan, which is sort of the brain, the core of our work. We just had an international conference, and thankfully, you shared the news about our conference. So thank you very much for spreading the word. Perhaps some of you could attend. This image sort of reflects the core of our topics. We have the 5 columns are our main 5 topics, And one of the essence of this image is cultural heritage as an ecological, economic, and social resource. And we looked at these 5 topics: cultural tourism, creative sectors, urban transformation, resilience, and cultural services for inclusive cities. We looked at them in working groups. We had international experts support us, and we came up with a lot of ideas. We looked at where is the greatest need for more work in the field of culture and cultural heritage. And we came up with ideas, a lot of ideas, and we had to narrow them down more and more, and came up in the end with 11 projects or actions, as we call them. Here they are. I won't present them all to you, but I'd be happy to talk more about them if you wish. Just to give you some examples, for instance, we look at the sharing economy, Airbnb, and other phenomenon that impact our cities and especially the cultural heritage. We look at the changing role of public libraries in our cities as places of education, places for meeting, etc. We look at resilience, and we are actually taking the UNESCO manual for resilience and want to transfer it to European cities. And we look at the dissonant heritage. It's actually my action. I'll be leading this for the next year, where we look at uncomfortable heritage in Europe. Here you just see that all these 11 actions are very much interconnected with each other. We did a major consultation process with the public, with the European Commission, and we had our action plan approved in October. And here's some final remarks. I want to, that'll be my last slides, if you allow. Some reflections from 2 years of working on these issues. Number 1, we want to foster a broader understanding of culture and cultural heritage in European cities. What do we mean by this? We want to look at tangible, but also intangible heritage. We want to look at various periods, not just medieval periods, but also more recent periods, and also comfortable, but also uncomfortable heritage. Protected heritage, but also urban fabrics, landscape, public spaces, etc. Here you actually see the Buzluja Memorial in Bulgaria, which we are working on with ECOMOS. You just mentioned ECOMOS. That's our partner on this action. We want to look at the democracy building capacity of cultural heritage, because our claim is that our joint European history builds the foundation for our democratic values and is manifested in our heritage. For instance, public spaces as places of meeting, participation, and freedom of expression. We want to increase resilience of European cities against threats, for instance, right now in times of pandemic, but also against climate change and other factors, because we feel that cultural heritage is a valuable resource to recover from these threats, and it's proven to be very adaptive and responsive over history. We want to promote integrated approaches, meaning, for one, the cooperation between all kinds of stakeholders dealing with urban planning and heritage issues, but also taking cultural heritage as a starting point for urban development and funding mechanisms. And lastly, from social inclusion to territorial cohesion, looking at heritage both from a place-based and people-based approach, looking at what's really specific about places, identity, know-how, and ensuring access to cultural heritage as a collective good. That's all from me. I hope I stayed within the time limit. Thank you for your attention.
All right, thank you, John. And I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions now, and the rest we'll save for the end of the presentation. Let's see, I think I saw a hand up. Amelia, do you have a question? No, okay.
I actually have something for that. If you want something.
I do. If no one has a question, I have a question.
Go ahead, Carlota.
Which is, I'm currently doing my internship at UNESCO, doing the implementation of the historic urban landscape. And I was wondering if you're kind of relating to this international framework and whether this is actually useful, like in a more pragmatic way.
Can you elaborate a little bit so I know?
Yeah, like for example, is this, are you relating to these kind of international conventions and recommendations when you try to determine the key areas? Are you working, because you're working also on a regional scale and on a European level, but are you connecting with other kind of above international guidelines and so on?
You mean guidelines that are not just European, but also more global? Well, we did, when we started, I showed you the image of the temple, our 5 topics. When we did this sort of stock taking, we took a look, or our experts took a look at all kinds of relevant documents, policies that are out there. And that was also going beyond the European scope. I'll be happy to share some of this with you if you're interested, because for one, I mean, it becomes clear when you look at cultural heritage from various perspectives, there's an enormous amount of analysis already out there, and you have to do a mapping first to know what's already there and where's the greatest need. And we are always leading the discussion. Does it make sense to look, as we say in German, across your own plate, say to, for instance, Japan or other places that might have very inspiring solutions to dealing with cultural heritage? Or are there issues that we are dealing with so specific that we should really focus on Europe? That's a debate where we don't have a clear answer. But I personally feel it's very valuable to have that outside perspective as well.
All right, do we have any more questions? All right, and if any of you think of more questions, feel free to write them in the chat and we can address them at the end of the presentation. So next, I will introduce our next speaker, which is Chi Wang, a master's student of architectural design at the Politecnico di Milano. Chi, the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. And can you share the control so that I can? Oh, yeah. Is it okay? Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for your time. And I'm Qi, and I'm a master student in Politecnico, and now I'm doing my Erasmus in Leuven Conservation Center. And today I just want to share my experience living in the city of Leuven, Belgium, that how they creative reuse of the heritages. And so the inspiration is from our course that we will ask to have an interactive walk in the city of Leuven. And I found it was really amazing that see a lot of heritages that is still used by the local people. And that's become the source of attract my exploring and makes me feel like I'm familiar with the city. And I think that's why Leuven was named as European Capital of Innovation 2020. And they indeed work hard to the sustainable heritage as an important social motor in these days. And they started to connect different people and perspectives to work together and lead some innovative and creative idea about how to reuse heritages. And talking about sustainable, that we all know the SDG 11.4 that's mentioned about strengthen efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage. I mean, on the one hand, it shows the importance of the protection of heritage, but I think on the other hand, it illustrates a really negative image and a fragile image of the heritage that always need to be protected rather than a motivator or a model of the society's development. So I think it's not easy to convince people to protect heritage, but it's a natural way to lead them to reuse the heritages. So here I got to start to talk about two cases of Leuven. One is the city wall of Leuven, that here you can see the transformation of how to use heritage is like a traditional sustainable way by the people in the past. And then I thought the adaptive function makes adaptive reuse of heritages at the present. So I want to make it short that even though the fortification function of the city wall has disappeared, but you can see from the history how people reuse them, they reuse the space or materials into nowadays became like a city park or private house. Or even though the wall was disappeared, they intervened some roast bar to show the traces of the historical walls, so that inspire people's curiosity to explore the city. It's like always legal set from the actual value to memorial value that how heritage could bring to us. And the second case is about the Park Bay of Leuven, that it mentioned about it strengthened about the idea of how to create social activities inside of the heritages and how to connect them with heritages. And so as we know, there's a lot of abbey in Belgium now, and here they did not just focus on the building itself, but they started to think about how to connect how to use the heritages as a condenser to connect with different communities, with the social, and to add, for example, they have cooperate with the urban farm company so that these areas around the abbey becomes a farm park, and that creates some restaurants, some shops that connected with the abbey theme, and also different community could join in. So that leaves my three questions, and it's a rough speech, but I think the three questions could be always wandering in my mind, and also the whole career, that what is sustainable city and why heritage is important in achieving sustainable city, and how to make heritage more sustainable. And for me, I think the sustainable city is just like a palimpsest or a bridge stone that it could be reused again, and it's like our memory to need to be maintained in a long way. And why heritage is important in achieving sustainable city, I think it could be a physical career of our collective memory, like Lucy mentioned before, and also it's a condenser to connect people. And also it's not a new way. Recycle is always a natural act from the history. And lastly is about how to make heritage more sustainable. I think from the case of Leuven, the social value need to be pay more attention, that how to connect the heritage with different stakeholders, and the government should lead innovative policies, and experts should have the responsible to make the public to understand the value of heritages, and so on, so that the different kind of community could be participate in. Yeah, I think, and some references, and thank you. It's how.
All right, thank you, Chi. And next we have Elena Kotish, a master's student in Cultural Heritage Studies at the University of Bucharest in Romania. Elena, the floor is yours.
Hello, let me share my screen. Is it visible? Yes, okay.
You're good.
So I will be presenting to you a new launched cultural project in Romania, which has the potential of becoming a factor of sustainable development in the area. I think the pandemic crisis has changed the way in which we look at the sustainable development goals, in the way that we see now that it's necessary to think about new innovative and creative approaches when trying to achieve these goals. And what I think is that cultural heritage can play, even if it's briefly mentioned, it can actually play an important role in achieving these goals, because what cultural heritage mainly does is create social cohesion, which is crucial if we think about creating a better tomorrow together. So the pandemic crisis has been in Europe, on Romania, and what I found myself asking is, how can cultural heritage foster change and development in the post-pandemic recovery, and in developing vulnerable communities in Romania. So I came across this project, which is the capital of Deisha, a living museum of European cultural heritage, and which has been developed by the National Institute of Heritage, following the collaboration with the County Council of Hunedoara, for the restoration, conservation, and valorization of Sarmizegetuza Regia, which is a UNESCO site. And what I found the most interesting is that the project offers a special attention to the communities in the surrounding areas of the monument. Sarmizegetuza Regia is situated in the Orăștii Mountains. It's one of the 6 Dacian fortresses included in the World Heritage List in 1999, and the former capital of the Dacian Kingdom. So it has a very important historical value, and a symbolic one for the Romania. But what I think is that when talking about this specific monument, it's very important to think about also the natural environment and the cultural environment. And I think that the different partners involved in the project have tackled this quite successfully until now, through impact studies on biodiversity and social and economical aspects. One of these partners is Mihai Eminescu Trust, to which it's been given the task to create inclusive methods of valorization. Mihai Eminescu Trust is a pioneer in developing strategies to empower vulnerable communities into taking action to conserve and sustainably make use of the cultural heritage for their development. So what they specifically want to do is go to these communities and find people, especially young people, and help them build knowledge and skills in order to empower them to take action in the community and to take action into the process of valorization of the monument. So they are trying to do this through workshops, events, summer schools, and of course through a continuous dialogue and consultation with the main stakeholders and leaders in these communities. And last, to ensure innovative approaches on the development of this project, a partner from Norway has been asked to assist the Romanian partners into finding the best solutions for managing this site. So in the following stages of the project, partners from both countries will reflect upon creating these strategies for best scenarios of management for this kind of site. I think it's clear that the implications of such a project are of crucial relevance in demonstrating how cultural heritage could contribute to sustainable development in Romania. Through its innovative, holistic approach, this is one of the most important initiatives that have been made in the field of cultural heritage in this country. And I think that the most important part is that It has the possibility to set a path for future cultural projects and to become an example of best practice. So in doing this, in this process, I think that dialogue is the main key. So what I'm asking you to reflect upon is how do we create such a dialogue between the specialists working on this project and the communities in order to find a balance between the efficient preservation of the monument and the sustainable creation of the monument by the community. And how do we maintain such a dialogue even after the official ending of such a project in order to pass the stewardship of the monument to the community in which it finds itself? And I think the most important question, which somehow encompasses the first two questions, is how do we create continuity for such a project so that we can make sure that even after the ending of the project, its effects will be in long term. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Elena. Certainly a lot to think about. And next up, we have Federico Valera, an Italian-Argentinian architect currently living in Norway, where he runs urban sketching workshops along with his architectural career. The floor is yours.
Hi. Let me see if I can share. Okay. I don't know if you can see. Okay, the main idea of this talk is to talk about how sustainability is connected with heritage, no? And I realized that the topic of sustainability, okay, some of the previous speakers were talking about a little bit about this, but sustainability nowadays is a very concept related to green and high technology, but also heritage could be related absolutely, since something that is sustainable a building that is could be sustainable because lasts longer in time, you know, when you make a proper restoration and conservation of the buildings. But the concept of sustainability is very well related right now in urban design to the concept of smart cities. And nowadays, the idea of the smart city is to make a very well connected city, very green, and with a very virtuous cycle of economy. And there are two ways of making smart cities. One is greenfields, yeah. And here you have Neon City. There is a new one in the Emirates, but also you have Maastricht City, Songdon City, and Planalty Valley that is on Portugal. But also there is a different way of making smart cities. There is turning existing cities into a smart. And this is a much more difficult process, let's say, because of course you are working on a consolidated situation. So the steps to start to make a city into smart, it would be an innovation district. I don't know what's going in. So the process of evolution of the innovation districts were from the industrial cities where all the industrial production was in the middle of the cities in the Industrial Revolution. But of course, for pollution, they had to take away all the factories outside of each city. Later appeared the concept of research parks as Silicon Valley. This is the example of the picture. That it's a much more green concept, very well connected in terms of technology. But actually, all the concepts of research parks at the end were secluded on themselves, not sharing the information. And this is the problem that they had. Nowadays, the innovation district is it's a concept that mixes these two previous concepts: industrial cities, because of the location, because they are very well connected with infrastructure, but also they have the concept of the research park with the much more greener idea, much more interconnected idea with the people, the gentrification. And of course, it became much more profitable the areas that were neglected because of the Industrial Revolution. Now, to make an innovation district, there are three assets. The physical assets that we talked already, the networking asset with the research parks, but also the economical assets. But the thing to get finally done an innovation district, you always gonna need to talk with the people that live in there. If the people are not willing to change and they are not willing to accept these new changes to innovation, it's going to be impossible to treat the areas. So taking all this into consideration, I started analyzing different cases of industrial districts, innovation districts, sorry. Boston, Melbourne, and Buenos Aires were the cases that I choose, and they were very successful in their cases. But taking a comparison between all of them, I noticed that there are certain topics that they were using all the time between each other, and where they put, let's say, the money and the willingness to change. But heritage, as you are seeing here, it was not one of them, and probably was because these cities are kind of new, if you want to say. But the heritage was not taken into consideration. There were another topics that it's going to be very long to explain right now. But heritage was not the case. So I started asking me which would be the situation, or how could be the possible situation where I could put an innovation district, or I can form an innovation district in a cultural place, in a heritage place. And of course, Italy would be kind of the choice because Italy is full of heritage and patrimony. So I choose the city of Piacenza in this case because had all this situation of the assets that we were talking before. The network is very well connected because it's a node city that connects the south with the north, and it's a very industrial city. So the economic power already also existed. So the problem was the heritage and the people in this case. So when I started analyzing the city, I realized that the city is fragmented in different areas, and these voids that you see in this picture, they are because of these black spots that you see that are the antique barracks of the military service. Imagine the entire population were to go into Piacenza to do the military service, and in 2005 they took them away. So in order to connect this, the main idea was to make this innovation district in all the barracks with different topics in order to make it much more profitable. And I took one of them, Barraca Lucignani, and the proposal was to make a research center where you can understand or investigate much more the agriculture, because this is a very fertile area, let's say. So the proposal, the model was to take all the stakeholders that could be included in this project, universities, the government, some industries, private, and the citizens, of course, in order to make a model that would be profitable. At the end, the result was the Agricultural Innovation District. That was this idea of a research center that will produce better technology to connect, to sell much more Italian products, let's say, and investigation. And in this way, there will be investment from the different, companies to make this process. Finally, I wanted to talk about this idea of sustainability and heritage, and how could be the heritage management connected with sustainability. If you make a building, a reuse of a historical building in a way that could be profitable also, it would be a good idea, not only to convert it in just a museum all the time. So the question will be, if you think that heritage conservation should also think on the business part in order to be sustainable in time. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Federico. And our final presenter today is Ahmed Morsi, a recent graduate of the Polytechnic University of Milan, where he studied a master's in architectural design and history. Ahmed, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Riley. Okay, so I'll be briefly looking at heritage from the point of view of arts-led urban development. So I'm specifically interested in subversive art as a geography of gentrification. So I try to look at the intersections between adaptive reuse, creative industries, and private development. I mostly look at Cairo, but I also try to broaden my view towards a more global scale. So in neoliberal, in neoliberal arts and culture-oriented urban development, creative practices or so-called creative industries and the spaces they are occupied are evaluated based on their profitability, commercial potential, and economic impact on surrounding areas. So this is usually judged based on spin-off developments, regardless of the actual usage or actual creative production or artistic production happening in these spaces. So essentially, spaces are actually that are actually heavily used are still seen as wasted if they don't produce any capital. These creative spaces fall on a spectrum, or I like to think that they fall on a spectrum between an extra-legal marginal creative underclass and this can be you can see this in many different forms. In Europe, for example, this is exemplified in the art squats of the 1990s, for example. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have the so-called creative elite or the creative class as conceived in the early 2000s. The valorizing power of the first group, so these art squats or these this extra legal use of space, and the cultural capital they produce also attracts the second group, which is also the group the private developers and local governments are usually trying to attract. And this group is then instrumentalized to revitalize physically decaying historic downtowns. And this is usually done by replacing the first group. So in this case, the traditional gentrification model is actually mirrored on the scale of the creative world. So poorer artists and players in the creative field are pushed out to make way for more affluent ones, which are then actually then instrumentalized to reach the end tenants. So the inherent gravitation of marginal creative groups with subversive overtones towards these dilapidated historical spaces, which is something that early protagonists of the creative class concept talked about, actually results in the perfect marriage between cultural capital, but also heritage value. And this is, of course, ideal breeding grounds for real estate investment. So adaptive reuse is actually then a very important tool in this process. Adaptive reuse is, of course, as everyone knows, a very progressive, historically progressive movement against fossilized concepts of heritage conservation. But in this case, it then and it has obviously gone through its own course of progression. So in this slide, for example, you see its progression in Egypt from the 1950s, where you saw the transformation of palaces into schools and kind of exemplifying the role of the state in social reform, to the open door policy in the 70s, which saw the realization of heritage actually being a tool in producing capital or accumulating capital, which of course, this abandonment of the state of its welfare obligations resulted in an abundance of abandoned state-owned or privately owned buildings, mostly modern heritage, which were then went through decay and were obviously reclaimed by the rising contemporary art scene. So it saw a very different use of space. And this, over the past 20 or so years, this saw the resurgence of the state in the form of state capitalism. So the state realized that, oh, we can actually use arts and culture or whatever to actually valorize these spaces and then make a resurgence. So in this case, adaptive reuse goes through its own. Of course, the discussion on heritage making is ancient, but in this case, adaptive reuse becomes a tool in the transformation of the practice of heritage making from one shaped by colonialism and nationalism into one actually shaped by neoliberal urban development. So obviously we're short on time, but I just want to present a few examples to kind of understand this dichotomy between these two different groups of art, because these groups of artists or creative professionals tend to be grouped in one huge group called the creative class. But of course, these examples kind of show the cracks in this this very naive grouping. So, for example, a very prominent example is the Tacheles in Berlin. So the Tacheles in Berlin was a building that was occupied by artists shortly after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And for over a decade, the building, which was actually originally planned for demolition, housed artist studios, workshops, a cinema, a dance club, and entirely reinvigorated the Mitte area in Berlin. So much so that the building actually acquired protected historical site status for its cultural value. Of course, as of today, the artists have moved elsewhere. The site was sold to a New York firm, and Herzog and de Meuron were commissioned to design a luxury residential, commercial, and of course, cultural intervention for the entire complex. And it's estimated to reopen in 2023. Another example is the Dominican church in Maastricht in the Netherlands. So this is a 13th century church that actually has a very colorful history of adaptive reuse. It was deconsecrated in the 18th century, and over the past 200 years, it saw its spaces being used for exhibitions, for examination halls. As you can see in this picture on the left, rock concerts in the 1990s. And its last use was a bicycle shed before its very heavily publicized transformation into a bookstore outlet. So the site was handed over to a book, went through a very extensive remodeling and handed over to a bookstore chain. And of course, the project was heavily publicized as a reclamation of a space that was abandoned. And of course, it was not abandoned. It was just not producing enough capital. My last example brings us back to Cairo. And the transformation of the Viennoise Hotel in Cairo presents itself as a textbook arts and culture facilitated gentrification project. So it started with a decaying historic hotel turned art space. So its previous owners actually used the space to host public exhibitions. And it remained so until it was actually acquired by a very prominent real estate developer downtown, who then in 2008, and then they continued this use of space even after the 2011 revolution. And at its peak, it actually hosted a very subversive exhibition as an homage to the revolution. So it saw very figurative depictions of revolt and anti-regime graffiti, and actually collaborated with a number of very prominent graffiti figures, revolutionary graffiti. Of course, this did not last for long, and the space 6 years later would be paraded in a promotional video circulating on social media, and the building went through extensive remodeling, closed off and handed over to a private investment company. And this, of course, was branded as a very successful reuse project, but the only outcome was that it was actually just closed off, heavily remodeled, and then closed off to the public. So this begs the question it begs an inquiry into what it means to revitalize a building or an area. What does it mean? In this context, we should really be heavily scrutinizing the tenacious usage of terms like revitalization, revival, regeneration, which are all very positive euphemisms of capital accumulation. So what does it actually mean to revitalize a building? Is it physical upgrading of an area, of a decaying area or a decaying building? Is it capital accumulation? Is it social cohesion? Yeah, do the first two actually exclude the last? So yeah, I was asked to provide a question, and this is a question. Of course, there's so many questions, but this is maybe a more overarching question that kind of sums it all up. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. Certainly a lot to think about with that question as well. And that concludes our presentations for today. So I would like to open the floor up to anyone that has questions for any of our speakers that presented today. Like we mentioned earlier, you're welcome to raise your hand and participate directly in the question and answer, or if you prefer, write your questions in the chat and make sure that you address the speaker that you would like to question.
Hey, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I wanted to ask Jan. He talked about uncomfortable heritage and that they were well, it was also part of what the urban agenda would be dealing with, or maybe a side project also from his part. So I was wondering which kind of measures are being taken to deal with uncomfortable heritage, and how are they dealing, with this current approach to decoloniality in museums and other heritage institutions. So, like, how are they dealing with this uncomfortable heritage? Is there a specific approach, or like how is it being? What is the focus that they're using?
Should I answer directly, or are we collecting questions?
Go ahead and answer directly.
Okay. Yes, so we are particularly focusing in our action on 20th century dissonant heritage, but we are having a debate about including, for instance, colonial aspects of colonial history, also because we are, of course, realizing that there is a big debate right now in the times of Black Lives Matters discussion. But given that we only have 1 year to implement this action, we have to sort of focus it. But it's certainly something we keep in mind. And we're also focusing on smaller and peripheral areas, not the big cities. Because, for instance, Berlin is full of dissonant heritage places that are already pretty well established. But it's more the small cities that have these big burdens, or what they perceive as burdens, of dissonant heritage, but we want to give them tools. And maybe I can just briefly mention how we proceed. So we started by making a sort of a selection of dissonant heritage sites across Europe. And it's a very long list, from Nazi camps. And I learned that there are, I think, 40,000 Nazi campsites across Europe. That's really a big field. But also communist heritage, heritage in Yugoslavia, all really very broad field. So we have this long list, and we want to look at some of them as pilots to look at, for instance, what kind of strategies did they use to approach this? How did they involve the public? How did they fund their activities? And based on this knowledge, we want to have an international symposium really looking carefully at strategies and recommendations, best practice, etc. And in the end, we want to come up with a sort of toolbox for all kinds of stakeholders dealing with dissonant heritage. For instance, educators, because we believe dissonant heritage should really be firmly involved in education, children, youth, any age group, but also looking at giving a tool to mayors who don't know how to deal with it, with property owners, artists, urban planners. So we don't just want to produce a report, but something that's really useful to stakeholders dealing with their heritage. Does that answer your question?
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
And I'll be happy to say more about it if you have more specific questions. I wrote my email in the chat.
Yes, thank you.
I wanted to go ahead and address a question we've had come up in the chat, which is, do you have some web pages or other service where we can keep in touch and read more about your projects? And so, like we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we are going to post all the questions that our speakers left us with on social media, and we invite you to leave your comments and follow the conversations there. But if the speakers have particular resources they want to share, we're happy to pass those along as well. And look out in, I believe it's the European Heritage Tribune, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of our speakers will be posting blog articles there later in the year. And if there's no more questions, I have one for Elena. You mentioned that your project focused on community involvement, and I'm curious if you were aware of or were part of the process of involving the community, and in what steps that took, and maybe what some of the challenges or lessons learned were from that.
Okay, so the project was just launched last week, and the partners involved didn't have a chance to go there in the communities and like consult them or I don't know, develop with them such strategies. So I think in the period, when the allow, the different partners will try to involve the communities. And I don't know if this has answered your question.
And we have another question in the chat from Veronica asking about the framework for objectively measuring the actual contribution of heritage to the sustainable agenda. Are there any liabilities? And that's for any speakers that think they can comment on that. Or maybe not at the moment. Maybe that's a question for more thought. Does anyone else have a question before we break off into the breakout rooms?
I can just say regarding the strategic development goals, I'll be able to answer this to you a year from now, because then we'll be actually at the end of our process, and we'll spend a lot of time thinking about how to measure contributions, how to monitor our success. But we are just at the beginning of our implementation, so it's too early, I'm afraid. But I'll be happy to come back in a year and tell you all about it.
All right, wonderful. So I think that concludes our question and answer session for today. Like we mentioned earlier, if you are interested in continuing these discussions and contributing your own ideas and thoughts, we would love to have you stick around and participate in the breakout rooms. If you're not able to stick with us any longer today, we thank you for your participation and ask that you kindly log off in the next few moments so that we are able to divide the remaining group into breakout rooms where we have questions prepared for you and are excited to hear everyone's points of view. And thank you again to all of our speakers for today.